Okay, I haven't really introduced myself. I'm Sergei Bashir. I'm a statistician come data science who started his own company in Portugal, Illustat, and I'm here to present for the next 50 minutes or so when to trust and when not to trust data science. Okay. I always like to start with a definition of data science. There isn't, an existing one that everybody's agreed on. If you go online, there's a lot of discussions, wherever you look. And I'm not really interested in that discussion, so I'll just use my own definition, which is using data, statistics, and programming in a given context to support decision making. You start with a question, you get some data, you analyze that data, you program that data to get some answers so somebody can make a decision. Whether it's a decision about economics for your country, whether it's a decision about healthcare, whether it's a decision about what you do to reduce pollution or so forth. Whatever it is, the context for me is one of the most important things. Now, I'm an old timer in a way because this for me is applied statistics. I was trained as an applied statistician, and then about 5-7 years ago, I woke up one day and realized I was a data scientist, and I'm still doing the same job, and I'm not doing anything different. So I'm strongly of the opinion that we're doing applied statistics. Maybe this is going to upset one or two of you, but it's not intentional. Machine learning is not data science. I'm getting this more and more. I do machine learning, I'm a data scientist. There's a lot of computer programmers who do machine learning think they're computer programmers. Machine learning in the context of data science is one type of analysis that you do in the whole framework of data science, okay? So this is, the outline of my talk will be, we start with data, because data science doesn't exist without data. We have data everywhere, so that's the first thing I want to emphasize. Then I want to talk about how that data gets into everyday life. And let's look at news headlines, newspapers. They're really a good source of, summarization of data and statistics. And from there, I want to just discuss in a few slides the general concept of what I mean by trust and trustworthy. Okay, we want to build up to the concept that I'm still sort of working on, and other people I think are also working on it, is trustworthy data science. What is it? What are we trying to get to? It's not the same as reproducibility, so I'll just let you know that at the start. We'll come on, and that'll be included, and then we'll summarize. So my objectives really are to encourage you to challenge your own thinking. Okay? Don't be afraid to go outside. That's part of the Unplugged initiative. Push yourself outside those limits. Now, be objective and critical about data science. That's how we're going to get to trustworthy data science. Don't give yourself any special privileges. Data everywhere. We are data. Okay, we are data. Why are we data? If we look at the top left-hand side here, we have what I call the demographic data, where you live, your date of birth, your education level, what type of job you have, whether it's blue collar in a factory or white collar where you're working in an office. And this sort of data is held by your governments, maybe your insurance company, maybe by other organizations that are interested in what you're doing. So this data is everywhere. Then what I have is this, I call it the social media you, but in fact what I really like to call it is a psychological you. It tells us who you are. There's a lot of data on these different platforms, Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, Google+, YouTube, Snapchat, Tinder, you name it. All of those are recording your day-to-day, more psychological state. If you're in a bad mood, they might be able to tell through your chats. If you want to show off to somebody you're having a great pizza in a restaurant, that's telling your egoistic side, perhaps. So there's a lot of data stored by different companies about the sort of inner you. And then we have the sort of your day-to-day you. What do you do with your life? What's your activity? What sort of holidays do you take? What do you do in your shopping? What sort of books are you buying? Where do you spend your money? All this data is held, again, maybe by the loyalty card you have from your supermarket or from your bookstore or from your bank who looks at every credit transaction. And don't forget, when you use that card, they know where you are, so they have location data as well. Then we have the, I hope, healthy you. Information that if you go to the doctor, that's stored as well. Maybe information about prescriptions that's stored on your health insurance records. Maybe you get a serious disease, or unfortunately somebody gets a serious disease like cancer. That's put into a registry, so you have incidence and mortality there. or your general sort of state of the nation, how people are in terms of obesity and things. So there's databases that are held by hospitals, health organizations, research organizations. So you could be part of that database. And finally, this is what I call the connected you, your emails, your web browsing history stored by your phone company, maybe your government if they're spying on you as well. Your mobile phone is a trove of information, because now, how many are we? We're probably about 35, 40 people here. Your phone, the phone companies that are scanning each of our mobile phones knows that we're in the same room in one way or another. We're very close to one another, so we've got an association. But one other piece of association is your contact list in your mobile phone or in your email. That's essentially your fingerprint. If you now change phone and you keep the same address book, they know it's you. It's very unlikely somebody will have the same combination as you. So your data is everywhere. We are data. That's data science, part of it. Okay. It's everywhere in your lives in terms of government. They record whether you're employed or not. They want to collect taxes. They want your money. So they want to know whether you're working or not. I mean, they love you, right? They do. You know, they want to spend it in your interest. So you have your unemployment statistics, crime statistics. Hopefully you're not in the wrong side of the crime statistic, but you could be in the crime statistic from the other side as a victim. Literacy rates, economics, census demographic. The non-governmental organizations try to collect information about social situation, homelessness, poverty, inequality. And you also have other organizations that aren't government, for example, collecting data about who's going to win the next election for opinion polls. Businesses have a lot of data. They collect stock price. Some of you work in the financial sector, you know the sort of data that you're holding as well. You have sales data, profits, and business confidence. Business confidence is a good indicator for government to understand what to anticipate in terms of tax receipts potentially, or what the manufacturing activity, or how their policies are really faring out in the country. Internet, well, we've already mentioned that. Your social media companies, your web browsing history is of interest to a lot of people. So there's a lot of information stored about you on the web. The health we mentioned as well, disease monitoring like cancer, or if there's a serious disease that's going through the country, like there was many years ago, swine flu, you want to know which person has this as well. So disease monitoring goes very broad in many ways. Pharmaceuticals, before you take a medication, you don't just get it. Somebody's done some studies, somebody's tested to see that a drug gives you more benefit than harm on average. And then you have the live births and so forth. And then we have the environmental. Climate change is very topical at the moment. You know, there's been a lot going on. Most unfortunately, that's been harmful to human and fauna and plant life, of course, as well. You have marine statistics about the number of fish left in the sea and the plastic that they're eating. You have animal, plants, in terms of whether it's a laboratory experiment or how to breed them and grow them to give you the most for consumption. And pollution, and so on. So there's data everywhere. If you're a data scientist, you should be in employment forever with the amount of data we have. It's just we often just don't have the money, I think. That's the main problem. So if we have data everywhere, by definition, we have data science everywhere. And that's the beautiful thing about what we do. We really get involved in many, many domains. Somebody, I can't remember who it is now, but there's a statistician who once said that we're lucky because we get to play in everybody's garden. And I think that's true. Let's play. News headlines and data science. Sometimes, I have to start with a tabloid newspaper in the UK. How many of you know the Daily Mail? Yeah. How many of you don't admit you know the Daily Mail? That's even more true. Daily Mail is a tabloid newspaper that publishes all sorts of health-related things. 1 week they'll publish coffee causes cancer. A few weeks later they'll publish coffee prevents cancer. So you get the idea of the level. And it's mainly about celebrity gossip. Here we have something which is lethal legacy of Dash for Diesel. Air pollution is killing 40,000 a year in the UK. So they link it in the second sort of bullet point to asthma, heart disease, cancer, diabetes, dementia. They also throw in the statistics saying that diesel car ownership has trebled over 15 years. There's a lot of data science there, as you can see. They're doing a pretty good job. That was published in February 2016. Now, Guardian is meant to be a more reputable newspaper, but I mean, when I read this headline, it sort of intrigued me. It says, air pollution crisis plagues UK, finds UN human rights expert. What is a UN human rights expert doing with pollution? Okay, calm down, read it. Okay, silent pandemic of air pollution affects UK children. So now they have this beautiful picture of a lady running along with her pram with all the pollution in the background. The poor baby's going to die if you look at that picture, you know. I wouldn't go to London again, I think, with a baby. And they say between 30 and 40,000 early deaths every year are caused by toxic air across the country. But they don't mention children there. Because my assumption was that this air pollution is killing off all the children, in the way the headline is written. So I went and looked deeper. The government invited the United Nations human rights expert to come and discuss about air pollution, and he said that UK wasn't doing very well, and that they expect 30 to 40,000 deaths. So that's it. So it didn't really give me a tremendous amount to go back and find a reference for where these numbers come from. And this is meant to be a reputable newspaper, and they generally have some very, very good science correspondence. Okay, let's talk about Público, the Portuguese news. You know, we're not going to just blame the British for being bad. That's not. But I couldn't. I mean, I'm going to be fair. I actually like this headline. So air pollution causes 6,630 premature deaths in Portugal. But they don't make it sensational. They don't throw in that your children are going to die if you take them out to breathe air. They don't throw in that it's linked to heart disease and asthma and so forth. So I think this gives me a bit more confidence, but I'm still curious to know where that 6,630 comes from. Okay? It's quite a precise figure. Because when you get to 29, who's going to be the 6,630th? People don't really get the concept of numbers with uncertainty necessarily. Okay, let's go to happier news. Okay, BBC News should be a respectable website. This was in April 2015. Switzerland is the happiest country in the world in 2015. 2016, Denmark is the happiest country in the world, and Burundi the least happy. And then we have some happy Danish people looking at the sun or something, I'm not really sure. And guess what? It goes from, in 2017, in March this year, happiest country is Norway. So which country is going to be the happiest in 2018? I mean, I can only guess that if we follow this trend, we're going from Switzerland to Denmark, further north to Norway. You're only left with the polar bears on the North Pole. So be very careful with these trends. What is happiness? Okay, we're not going into philosophy. Okay, social media is always a very nice one. If you're a parent here, or if you're a young person, you have everything in the world to worry about. So users fear social media is making them ill, but they can't stop. Okay, I mean, it's quite sensational because then they somehow throw this in. Users, some 90% of 18 to 29-year-olds own a smartphone. So are we talking about users who are 18 to 29, or are we talking about users who are everybody, including, you know, your grandparents or me or anybody else who's over the age of 30 there? And in the same newspaper, this was February, somebody wrote an opinion piece just to cheer you parents or you young people up. It said, don't listen to the moral panic. Social media is good for young people's health. And the argument is that you mix together and, you know, you form communities and you express yourselves. So now based on this level of, headlines, where does that leave you? Do you think it's good for you or do you think it's bad for you? Who thinks social media is good for you? Raise your hands. Okay, a few of you. Who thinks it's bad for you? Okay, who didn't vote? Okay, so we have, so basically we have a mix and there's no real conclusion, you know, and this is illustrated by the headlines. But I want to make some comments on the news headline about news headlines. They're designed to catch your attention and give you a flavor of their story. And this story may or may not reflect the source from which it originates. And one of the other things, like we saw with the example on the social media, people have different interpretations of those headlines. So we've been talking about data science, and we've been talking about these news headlines. And now what I'm going to say is we're not interested in that. So we are not interested in how the headlines are portrayed. We are not interested in the individual emotional sort of reaction. What we're interested in this presentation about trustworthy data science is the validity and the quality of the source data science. It's not about the headlines, as I say. And one day, it could be your data science work. Now, it might not end up in a newspaper with a creative headline, but you do, if you're working in any situation, you go to your boss with something. But if you're a data science, you go with some data science results. I mean, who doesn't? Or you go to your clients with it, or you go to your line manager who goes to the big boss. So your results can have an impact going upwards. So it might not be a news headline that causes a big public panic, but it could cause challenges in your work environment, be it public, be it private. My question to you is, could you defend your work? Would you be comfortable to defend your work if you're in a company of 20,000 people and you're a little data scientist, or you feel like a little data scientist who's doing a great job in a little corner, and one day it finds its way to the chief executive officer, they call you into the office, could you defend it? Now you might think, oh, it's not going to happen to me. Believe me, it could happen to you. Okay? It's happened to me on a number of occasions, unexpectedly. They ring you, you have to be there. You have to be defensive. Are you ready? There's only one way to be ready, which is to be prepared in advance. So the question really is, can we trust the source data science? Why does your boss, why does the government minister call you to their office? Why do they want to know this? Because if the data science can't be trusted, the outcome could be harmful. Let's look at that example of pollution. Let's say that the data was not very good, and in fact you underestimated the deaths. That's not, you're not going to take enough action to present more deaths. Or let's say the data was not very good, but you had the opposite effect, that you overestimated the number of deaths. That's also bad, because you're going to spend a lot of money trying to save deaths that are not going to occur. So it's never good to be too far away from the reality, let's call it, or an unbiased estimate of what's really going on. So there are consequences that are serious, so we have to think about them. So data science and trust. So the headline in Publico was, air pollution causes 6,630 premature deaths in Portugal. What would make you trust that headline? Now, while you're thinking of that, I want you to think of measures to reduce or prevent bias. I want you to think about measures where the uncertainty comes in. And the final thing I want you to think about is validity and quality. So, let me ask you the question again. If the headline is air pollution causes 6,630 premature deaths in Portugal, what would make you believe that? I mean, what would make you trust that number is a valid number to present to the Minister of Environment? You're having to review somebody else's work, or you're having to make the argument from your side saying, I've done this work, this is my number. And the reason you should believe it is Okay, any takers? Any volunteers? Okay, first question I want to ask is, do you believe that number of 6,630? Raise your hand. Now everybody's going to be like, not me. You don't believe that number?
That depends the way.
Can I start here and I'll come back to you? Okay, please. Okay.
I think you should analyze the sources of the information, first of all, because if someone says that you have 6,630 deaths, premature deaths, I cannot believe that the first notice I see. So I must probably make some search and see some other sources or whatever.
So when you say other sources, what do you mean?
I mean...
other studies?
Yes,
or?
yes, other studies, yes, of course.
Okay, so can I take this? Okay, so you'd like to put this number in the context of maybe other countries of a similar profile? Or different profile. So what sort of countries could you think of that you'd want to compare to that would give you similarity to Portugal?
I will compare first of the same kind of pollution that Portugal has, some other studies of the environment.
But then we have okay. So you do it on the basis of the levels of pollution being similar. Okay. So you want basically external validation or external verification that this is similar to what's going on.
In this case, in this case, there are some studies about Europe countries that make some kind of pollution. I will go back that first, and I will try to analyze and make some other studies.
Okay, so one dimension is to look at other data. I'm more interested in the comments, and it's a very good point. So check with what's going on in general, and do your results make sense in the context of all the other evidence around you? And this is a very important check to do. Look at your results when they come from the software or wherever you produce them. Do they make sense? Can you explain them? This is something people often forget. You had a point as well, please?
Okay. The point is that the wording is wordless because it was not defined what premature means. In a certain sense, all deaths are premature. So if you are premature one day, it's not so bad that you are 10 years, I'm sorry, 10 years before your due time, or 20 years.
It's a very good point.
Big difference, so that does not make any sense.
Absolutely, a really good point, which is, what's the definition of a premature death? How do you calculate somebody dies early? You've got to die one day. And as you say, you can look at it one say that everybody dies prematurely, if you compare yourself to the person who lives the longest. Or the other way, you can look at it, well, you've got to go, it doesn't really matter. So what's the definition that you're using to quantify premature deaths? There are other measures as well that you could look at. Sorry?
Life expectancy at present.
Yeah, or years of productive life loss or something. Okay, things like that. Okay, any other points that would concern you? So far we've had, how do these numbers fit in the context of what goes on outside? How do these numbers fit into the context of the definitions that we're using? Anybody want to make a point? Sorry, we need, as we're recording, please. Oh.
I was just thinking, how did they know what caused the death by pollution? I can be a smoker, and I'm exposed to the pollution, so maybe I died from the cigarette, I didn't die from the pollution.
Okay, so how do you attribute somebody's death or the number of deaths? That's because you don't need to attribute necessarily an individual and say they died of air pollution, but you need to say that cause was most likely as a result of air pollution. So how did you attribute it? Now we have two factors. We got to put into context air pollution, and we need to put into context the effects of air pollution. How do we do that?
You need a pollution-free baseline.
You need a
baseline of pollution-free.
You need a baseline of pollution-free, but we live in the real world. We don't make people or things baseline. So what sort of information can we collect to get as close as possible to the ideal situation?
A measurement of pollution, and say death is a function of pollution, so you see what's the relationship.
But what is pollution?
You'll need measurements of their particles, you'll need indexes of pollution. I don't know which.
As we're.
CO2 is not pollution.
Okay, it's also caused by.
Sorry, it's good to have another.
Conversation.
Sorry.
We could measure CO2 levels, or the increase of CO2 levels in the cities specifically in the last, 40 years. Maybe.
Okay.
Is often good.
So we want. Okay. So now, but the. Okay. Can I just bring? It comes back to the point of definitions again. How do we define air pollution? Which particles are you particularly concerned about, and what's the effect of those particles on health? So, we now sort of complicated situation. So what do we need to understand air pollution and the link to people dying? Can we get that from the same data, from the same sources? We can't get it from the same data. Can I get some other views? Anybody say why we can't get it from the same data? What data would you need?
With the same assumption.
With the same, okay.
With the same assumptions.
How do you mean the same assumptions?
to the same criteria. They have to collect the data using the same.
But now you've got two types of data. You've got the pollution data and you've got the link to health. Okay.
You would need medical data to establish a causal link between the existence of certain types of pollution and the incidence of, say, certain types of illnesses, the impact of those illnesses on expected lifespans, and from there infer a measure of premature death, as was raised on the right-hand side just there. You would need to cross that medical data with actual measurements in the atmosphere, and cross that with pollution, with the population data to see where people are in relation to where the pollution is.
Okay. So you need to find, you need to find a relationship, a mechanism of defining the relationship between air pollution and, the health effects of air pollution. Let's call them that. And you want to go back and link that to, particular incidents of air pollution, maybe where somebody lives and whether it's highly polluted or not. Or you want to find some mechanism that links those together. So if you have data that somebody died very close to a highly polluting factory for a respiratory disease, you might associate that with the pollution that they experience, or the inhale of the pollution that they experience from the factory. But for most people, we don't have that level of information. How do we manage that? And what's the effect of going from a model where you map precisely where the data is coming from in terms of the health effect and in terms of the pollution effect in the air?
Sometimes it's not easy. Sometimes.
Sorry, please. So everybody can hear you.
Sometimes it's not so easy, because sometimes the land is infected for many, in previous years, some decades before. And then people have some diseases after 30 or 40 or 50 years.
Exactly.
And it seems that they are affected by a factory that are nearby them, and in fact it's not.
No, absolutely. Indeed. There's the extra complication of a causal link between air pollution and a given health effect. So the moment you don't have that causal link, what happens? You increase the uncertainty. The moment you don't have any close link, you again increase the uncertainty. And that's what I meant by characterization of uncertainty. And we often forget that. And just by stating this figure of 6,630, we haven't stated what the uncertainty is and what uncertainty we've quantified. So we've looked at this. Now let me take some steps back just to answer this, and given the interest of time. So what do we want? We want to be sure that the data is reliable. We have good data that allows us to answer two questions, which is, number one, what's the link between, what are the pollution levels effectively? What are the trends for the pollution levels that we're observing? So we want reliable data on pollution levels. Then we want reliable data that tells us what's the link between pollution and the health effects. Notice I'm not using the word deaths, because we brush over some things that you hear in the media more recently, certainly in the UK media and a bit in the Portuguese media, about the rise in asthma and respiratory diseases in children. And we don't know whether it's definitely due to pollution, but there seems to be some link there, and some sort of anecdotal, or maybe some studies that link it as well. So there is different degrees of data. So you can have uncertainty when you link the level of pollution to how much of the overall deaths, or the premature deaths, if you want to define them, are a result of that pollution. And then we have to go into doing some modeling. You want to do some modeling, and you have to do two-level modeling. One is about the trends that you observe with the pollution, and one is in relation to the relationship with the health effects. By having those two models, you have some additional uncertainty. And you can't assume that. Often what happens, they say, well, we think 30% of the deaths because of asthma or lung cancer or respiratory diseases or anything like, categorization of these diseases, 30% of them are linked to air pollution. In reality, we know it's not exactly 30%. In the same way, we know that's not 6,630. Now, how would your Minister of Environment react if you went to them with a number that said it's anything between, let's say, around 1,000 up to 15,000? But now, he's going to kill you. I'm not convinced of that. I think there's laws that are on your side for that. But more importantly, I mean, this brings up quite an ethical dilemma for us data scientists. Do you want to fool him or her into believing that the 6,630 is an exact figure and they can believe it? Or do you want to say, look, you know, on the evidence we have, we believe it's between 1,000 and 15,000. On the evidence we have, it's between 4,500 and 7,500. Remember, a lot of money might be spent to make some changes. Okay, so you get the idea that as you start to pick apart this number and you go back to the source, there's a lot. I mean, we've really covered this much. I normally do this in the context of medical, you know, products, you know, like giving you health benefits. And I remember doing it once, and the group didn't want a break. It took 3 hours just to discuss some of the basic issues. We just kept on going because somebody raised a point which contradicted that point. That's a complexity if you look into it. But it's also the beauty of what we need to do is to arrange it in a way that we can defend it and say that there is this level of uncertainty. There is things that we cannot guarantee to you. It's not any, I mean, data science, applied statistics, is the study of uncertainty, the variability. That's what makes it fun. If there was no variability, we wouldn't have this meetup and we wouldn't have a job, okay? There'll be some clever computer programmer who would have solved all the problems for us. Okay, let's move on to trust and trustworthy.
Sorry.
Sure.
Do you think that number is a statistic?
Sorry, I don't hear you.
Sorry, I was thinking about this, about your question. And I think this number comes from basically from a group of doctors or a medical space or something that is basically when someone deaths, it's a premature death, like he said, and it's up to the doctor to decide if it's air pollution or it's another cause. So it's just a plus one, just one more death is the case is air pollution is plus one.
But
if you ask me, if what are the deaths for the next 3 years regarding air pollution, that will be a data science issue. For right now, for this number, it will probably be a plus one on a medical cabinet or something like that.
Yeah, can I?
Okay.
Yep. In fact, I just want, I can clarify that with something I've worked on quite extensively. Indeed, in the medical notes, they might note that the cause could have been air pollution. However, in the official registration system, it will be they died because of a lung disease or a respiratory disease. So it's not going to be linked to smoking, it's not going to be linked, it's going to be assumed it was smoking, or it's going to be assumed it's going to be air pollution. But in the medical notes, yes, it could be. But that's not what gets necessarily to the data scientists at the end. These are actually, from my understanding, these are estimates that were done at a European level, so each country has them. UK has 40,000, Portugal has 6,630. Okay, I mean, you can see that a lot of discussions come up, a lot of points like this will come up. We can continue this for many hours if we allow the discussion to go on, but what we'll do is we'll move on to trust and trustworthy. Let's look at the meaning of these words. I want to give some thoughts on trust and trustworthy, some thoughts. The first thought is, earning trust is very, very hard, but losing it is very easy. For example, you come to me and you start to make friends with me and you start to confide in me. So effectively, you start to trust me in one way or another. And the more I listen to you and the more I sort of, support you, the more you'll probably trust me. So I'm beginning to earn your trust. But the moment I go and start speaking to a group of people about what you've been telling me, do you trust me anymore? It doesn't take very long to lose it all, and that's the same in data science. It doesn't change. Secondly, it's not binary. It could be you trust the data but not the analysis. Or you trust me to do your data science analysis, but you're certainly not going to trust me to cook your, bacalao breast, because I'll do a pretty bad job of it. Okay, so it's not a binary thing. It might be for specific areas. Now, I want to make the point, data science has many potential points of trust failure. And trust leaks, I call them. And we're going to discuss some of those in a minute. Trust and trustworthy. What's the difference? What am I talking about when I move from trust to trustworthy? It's not about trust and building trust. A con artist uses trust to cheat you. They build trust. Okay? They build trust or increase their trust. That's their job. That's their art. And then they take your money and they don't even say thank you. They just go away. They don't even say goodbye. Your money's gone. Because they have enough of the trust they need to run away. So it's not about increasing or building trust. So you have many organizations, in fact this all started from many years ago in an organization where they were trying to increase and build trust. It failed because that's not what was happening, because people didn't really trust the con artist. Unfortunately in that case, the guy at the top was a con artist who didn't really extend trust to others. So it's not about building or increasing trust. It's about being trustworthy. Is the person competent? Are they reliable? And most obviously honest. If any one of those three components is missing, then they're not trustworthy. If I'm not honest, I'm not trustworthy. If I'm not reliable, I'm diminishing that trust. So you must earn trust to be trustworthy. I don't expect to be given trust. And in fact, I think it's positively harmful. People just give me their trust so openly. I think we have to build relations with different people. I want to earn your trust, and you should want to earn, I want you to, trust me by earning it. I have to work hard until I get to the point where I've earned a trustworthy relationship. Unfortunately, this is discussed a lot in business and misunderstood, but this wonderful video, if you have 10 minutes of time, it's a TED talk by Honora O'Neill, What We Don't Understand About Trust. After reading many books about trust and so forth, in 10 minutes, I got it much more clearly from this video. So a strong encouragement to watch it. Very, very, very beautifully crafted, I think. Trustworthy data science. So now we're getting to the meat of what we've been discussing. So trustworthy data science includes being open and transparent, which by definition for me implies being honest, especially about your strengths and weaknesses. Okay, the moment you make yourself sort of honest, open and transparent about your weaknesses, you make yourself vulnerable, yes? I put my weaknesses on the table about my work. I'm going to be attacked on this. But that vulnerability is what also makes you more trustworthy. The moment you try to hide those weaknesses, especially with somebody sitting on the other side that understands what you're doing, then they think this guy's hiding, or this person or this data scientist is hiding more from me. So that you have more to lose by not being vulnerable. Your strength is your vulnerability. Now, you must be willing. Now, it's very easy to define a trustworthy relationship and trustworthy data science. Well, I want great data from you. I want great analysis from you. I want great communication from you. But whatever you ask of the others, you should be willing to give yourself. Okay? I think it's always a two-way relationship. If I ask you for something, I am willing to give it to you. Now, that's not a good basis on which to define trustworthy relation, because you can set the baseline very low as well. So what's a good compromise for everybody? Okay, let's look at this in more detail. So the following slides will give you some ideas on how to achieve what I call trustworthiness and how to assess trustworthiness. Remember, there's two relationships here. You as a data scientist, many of us work with data, whether you are an official data scientist or not. Your work has to be trustworthy, so you have to make it. But also, when you see other people's work, you have to have the ability to assess that it's trustworthy. So it's two ways, and you must remember that. And these slides, they're not a comprehensive list, and they're not intended to be. So it's just a little bit more complicated than that, but we'll save that for another day. So, data science in practice, what do? We have an objective. We have a question. What's happening with air pollution and health-related effects of air pollution? And then we want to make some decision. How do we reduce air pollution? Do we do it through traffic measure means, or do we give people other incentives like in the industry or airline industry? What do you do to reduce pollution? So that's your question to decisions part. In between, to answer those questions as a data science, we collect some data, or we have some data available. Some data we don't define. The weather. The weather is automatic. You collect it. It happens. Okay? You don't design it to collect it in a special way. Medical trials, you design it. You take that data and you simplify it by means of analysis. You have lots of values. You don't give those back to your minister. You don't give them back to your boss. You summarize it in a way that gives ideas of what the patterns and trends are in that data. And you communicate that in a way that can be used to make decisions. So you start with a question, you do your data science process, and somebody will make a decision. So let's look at those components individually. The question. What are the essentials of trustworthy question? Well, they should be objective, unbiased, and answerable. Quite clearly, they should be answerable. So if you look at the first question, are there more deaths from air pollution? Well, that's not objective, that's not unbiased, and that's probably not answerable, because what does more deaths mean? We had the question about premature deaths already. What you might want to say instead is, what are the air pollution trends for Portugal? And what are the health effects of air pollution? And you might specify that then to saying what are the health effects of air pollution in Portugal, in case there's different dynamics to the whole of Europe. So it's how you wish to define it. So the question's relatively straightforward. What we're going to do from the question is I always take you to a decision. Before we get to data science, remember, we're doing data science thinking. Think about the question you're going to answer. And you're going to give an answer. Try to understand what sort of decisions can be made and how they are made. Let's look at this. On the left, first and foremost in your decision, you have regulations. They are EU limits on pollution. If your government is very naughty and the limits remain too high, they will get fined by the EU probably. So there's regulations that go into a decision. Then on the right-hand side, you have other evidence that might go in. For example, in London, they introduced a congestion charge. That means a traffic control measure. If you drive into London, you have to pay quite a high price. It's about €12.50 or something. You drive into London each day. If you have an old car, you pay £10 more. So it comes to about 22, 25 euros per day. So you can look at that evidence to see if you took similar measures in Portugal, would it work? But it's not so simple, because there's financial implications, not just for the government of introducing the monitoring system and the fining system and the issuing permit system, but also the financial implication to individuals. And you have another issue of personal experience. The government knows that if you tax people too much, they don't vote you back in again. So your personal experience might be, okay, I've got to be careful. You as a person, somebody else would think, well, my personal experience, I cannot afford to go into the city. So the government has a desired effect, but it might not make your job work. So you have to be more creative. And all of this involves risk-taking. Whichever decision you take, there's uncertainty around it. That uncertainty comes from different sources. The regulations, other evidence, personal experience, financial. And that means whichever decision you take, the government might say, yes, we'll have a charge for people going into Lisbon. Well, there's a cost to people and the risk of upsetting them. Or we don't do it. Then there's a cost to people because more people are dying prematurely and getting respiratory diseases. So you can see that the decision-making process is quite complex. And then there's a data science that sort of leaks in sometimes, and it's very, put it in light of front. And, if you really want your data science to have a good impact on that final decision, make it trustworthy. Don't give them reason to dismiss your data science. I've worked in this area long enough now, quite a period of time. I mean, I will be honest and tell you that most of the time, my data science work, or applied statistic work, isn't the biggest factor in the final decision, unless the regulation defines it, which is in the case of medicines. The regulation is very strong, where the statistics has a strong role. But otherwise, I would say most of the decision-making is all the other factors. And I have to compete hard. I'm glad you're nodding your head there. If you have the same experience, that's brilliant. You have to work hard to make your work respectable and acceptable, and that means making it trustworthy. So remember that. It's not to put you off. And also, I want to make one more point about decision making. Don't do what I did in my early career, get emotionally involved with decision making, okay? I'm not the minister. It doesn't really matter what I think. The minister just knows I'm a data scientist in some office over there. He might not even know that. He just knows papers come from there with numbers on it. Okay, so don't get emotionally involved that decision goes in the way it doesn't. Because when we asked a question about social media, we had a fair split between, you know, maybe it's bad for you, maybe it's not, and maybe I don't know, which is fine. So that's the same in decision making. It's not the data scientist's role necessarily to do that, but your role is to ensure that you give the best evidence and make a good decision. Data, yay. It has to be appropriate. It has to be appropriate in the sense it's representative. Imagine all the Portuguese data for pollution is collected next to the motorway. Is that representative? No, you're all laughing, so I guess you take that as a no. So, yes, so make sure the data is representative. If it's all collected in the countryside, you have a different problem. And how about where you take it from? If you take it all from Lisbon and Porto, is that representative? No. So think about how you take samples from the country. But then the next thing is, what's the quality of those samples? When you're measuring, what instruments are you using? Are they calibrated? Are they valid in the sense of measuring air pollution? Are they comparable to other countries in the European Union with whom you do joint studies about air pollution? And the processing of data, what do you do when you don't have data one day because your equipment went off? Do you guess the values? Do you pretend they didn't exist? Or we just say, well, that's one less day in the calendar? I mean, how do you handle the missing data, the processing? Maybe there's other processing. How do you calculate which proportion of the air is this particular pollutant or that particular pollutant? Okay, moving on to the analysis. Well, with the analysis, you always start with summaries, yes, I hope, we believe. Okay, good. So we start with summaries. What do those summaries tell us? Those summaries might give us indications to how things are looking in your data. What seems to be normal? Hang on, we have lots of zero values. What happened there? Oh, the machine stopped working and we just put zeros instead of saying it was a missing value. Or we have values that are 5 times higher than the most polluted part of Europe. What happened? Oh, it's a different unit. And these things happen. So the summary statistics are a very valuable way of understanding what's going on. Data visualization, you draw a little map and you put the pollution spots on the, pollution levels in different colors on the map. What happens if you notice that there's a heavily polluted area in the countryside? If it's highly, highly polluted, does that worry you?
Yes.
Why? Because?
Because it's a place that a person shouldn't be, because it can get several kinds of diseases.
Okay, so typically you would expect in the countryside that you wouldn't have a high level of pollution.
Correct.
Okay, which is fair, which is a very fair assumption. But when you look deeper, you might find that very close by there's a factory that's polluting. So now you think, well, it's a countryside, but somebody's cleverly built a stupid factory there. Or it could be that somebody's expanded a farming operation that's producing certain types of, pollutants in the air from the animals, for example. So looking at your data reveals a lot. So look at it graphically. And you have to model your data. So if you have a day that's highly polluted with lots of wind and lots of rain, will that affect the pollution levels? It will, okay. If it's a very hot day, very cold day, very cloudy day, so we see that the effect of the weather could be there. So maybe in your model you need to take into consideration what's going on. You need to explain exactly what you take into consideration. When you link the pollution trends to the deaths as a result of pollution, you need to explain how you're linking those models. Is it just a percentage calculation, or is there a formal link between the two? And finally, your models always have an assumption. And this is something that frustrates me a lot. Please write down your assumptions. Tell me that you assumed a normal distribution. Tell me that you assumed that the measurement on this day is much more correlated to the measurement on the day before, or that you just assume that there's no real correlation and they have equal weight in your model. I think it's quite reasonable for some people to assume that if the pollution is high today, most likely it will be high tomorrow. Do you agree?
Especially in the UK.
In the UK, yes, where all the babies are dying in front of the pollution. No, so it depends. I mean, it might indeed in the UK it might be a valid model, but in Portugal, if you're living by the sea, it might not be a valid model because the things are changing so fast. So it's important to state those assumptions and let others judge whether it's right or whether it's wrong. I mean, I'm presenting what I believe is the right analysis with the knowledge. We'll come on to that in knowledge, but it might not be right. And finally, your analysis has to be generalizable. If you take only pollution measures next to the motorway, it's not really generalizable to the whole of Portugal. It's only generalizable to everybody who lives near a motorway. So you have to think, how do we sample, how do we present the analysis and so forth, so that we can interpret what's happening across Portugal. Now, there's two quotes here that I really like, and I've quoted them in the previous presentation as well, which is, remember that all models are wrong. Okay? All the models that data scientists, applied statisticians are wrong. But the practical question is, how wrong do they have to be not to be useful? What? Okay? So at which point does your model become unreliable? When do you stop believing in your own model? Where do you break your model? I like to use a terminology. How flexible and how robust is your model? If you don't understand that, then you can't understand the level of uncertainty in your model. It might be the case that you have to fit 3 or 4 different types of model to come to a conclusion of what's going on, because no model is right, and maybe looking at it from different angles with different factors and different assumptions gives you a clearer picture of what's going on. And then the next one is far better an approximate answer to the right question, which is often vague, which has a lot of uncertainty, than an exact answer to the wrong question, which can always be made precise. And machine learners amongst us, this is one of the things I keep coming back to when I have to sit down and discuss with you. You know, be very careful. Machine learning is fantastic. It's a statistical technique. For me, it was classification type problems or prediction type problems based on a data set that you take a sample from and do it. This is applied statistics. But there's a lot of dangers in doing that. And one of the dangers is you end up answering the wrong question. Okay. And finally, how do you communicate your work? Make sure it's understandable. Now, I'm not saying it's got to be understandable for the average person on the street. It's got to be understandable for the people with whom you work in the context, for the pollution experts, for meteorology, for the meteorologists. And make sure it's understandable by the people who make the decisions. It's not a very easy thing to do always. It has to be relevant, meaning you have to answer the questions. Okay, and explain where the answer that you give or the answers that you're given are going to fail, so that they can see how to make the best possible decision. It should be simple. Try to explain it in a language that people understand. If you're writing a technical report for other data scientists, statisticians, or other people, that's fine, that's one thing. But when you're communicating it further for a decision-making process, it's got to be simple. Your minister's not going to understand what a machine learning model is. He's just going to understand they threw data in a computer and it gave a number. Okay, that's really the reality. And finally, as I said, coming back to open and transparent, which means be honest. Be honest about your strengths and weaknesses. That's what's going to make you trustworthy. How many of you have heard of reproducibility? Okay, this is becoming very fashionable. I just want to make a point. Reproducibility is not trustworthiness. It's not the trustworthy part. But it's a part of that process. So whatever you do in terms of processing your data and collecting it and your analysis and your communication should be reproducible. I'll give you my programs, you should be able to run them. Whichever programming language I'm using. I'll give you my code and things, you should be able to replicate it in another programming language as well, get the same results essentially, more or less sometimes because of how the algorithms to get particular results, they might differ by a little bit. So reproducibility is an essential part of trustworthy data science, but in itself it's not the whole. So coming to the end of my talk, the summary, when to trust and when not to trust data science. I think there's 3 key elements which you've already picked up. It's about trustworthiness, the competence of the work that you do, the reliability of the work you do, and the honesty. Then there's a part about trust being earned to be trustworthy. You remember, you want people to start trusting what you're presenting in terms of trustworthiness. So that would mean, being very clear about the bias prevention and reduction measures, stating the uncertainty, stating your assumptions, and so forth. On the other hand, openness and transparency about your strengths and weaknesses. Make yourself vulnerable. That's how you're going to get the trustworthiness. And then we have the whole framework of trustworthy data science, which is objective and critical evaluation of your work and of others. So it has to be objective, it has to be critical. It can't be something that you decide for yourself is different to somebody else. Reproducibility is an important part, but it's not the whole. So in summary, when and when not to trust data science it's all about trustworthiness that you have to earn, and you earn that through being objective, critical, and honest. Thank you very much. Any questions?